this part one of my Chester Millennium Trail, laid down in 2000 as part of the city's 2000 Years of Building Millennium Festival. All 40 buildings on the trail were selected by local people as outstanding examples of Chester's architectural development over 2 millennia, from Roman times to the present day. Chester was founded as a castrum or Roman fort with the name Diva Victrix in the reign of the Emperor Vespasian in 79 AD. One of the main army camps in Roman Britain, Diva later became a major civilian settlement. Chester was one of the last cities in England to fall to the Normans, and William the Conqueror ordered the construction of a castle to dominate the town and the nearby Welsh border. Chester was granted city status in 1541. Chester is one of the best preserved walled cities in Britain. Apart from a 100-metre section, the Grade 1 listed walls are almost complete. It has a number of medieval buildings, but many of the black and white buildings within the city are Victorian restorations, originating from the black and white revival movement. The Industrial Revolution brought railways, canals and new roads to the city, which saw substantial expansion and development. A considerable amount of land in Chester is owned by the Duke of Westminster, who owns an estate, Eaton Hall, near the village of Eccleston. He also owns London properties in Mayfair. Grosvenor is the Duke's family name, which explains such features in the city as the Grosvenor Bridge, the Grosvenor Hotel and Grosvenor Park. Notable people who were either born or lived in Chester are Sir John Vanbrugh, the architect, and he was raised in Chester. Daniel Craig was born in Liverpool Road in 1968. Comedian Russ Abbott, born in Chester in 1947. Doug Ellis, former owner of Aston Villa, who was educated in Chester. Rugby player Ben Foden was born in Chester in 1985. Footballer Danny Murphy was born in Chester in 1977, and Michael Owen was born here in 1979. Gymnast Beth Tweddle attended the Queen's School. Football commentator Martin Tyler was born in Chester in 1945, and most famously of all, Lee Latchford Evans of pop group Steps was born in Chester in 1975. As you can probably tell, this part one of this Millennium Trail tour was filmed just before Christmas, and I took advantage of visiting the Christmas trees on display in Chester Cathedral, and you'll see those later on. They were really spectacular. This is Chestertown Hall. It was designed in the Gothic style by the Belfast architect W.H. Lynn and opened by the Prince of Wales in 1869. This replaced the building of 1698 called the Exchange, which burned down in 1852. Designs were selected by way of an architectural competition, and it was built between 1863 and 1869 at a cost of £40,000. The town hall contains a large assembly room, council chamber and Lord Mayor's parlour. The grey and pink sandstone clock tower is 160 foot high. This is Abbey Square. Most of these houses were built in the mid-18th century on the site of the old Abbey kitchens, bakehouse and brewery. Each terrace has a uniform design, but the individual houses are very different in their detailing. So this is Addleshaw Tower. This remarkable freestanding tower, designed by George Pace in sandstone and Welsh slate, has housed the cathedral bell since 1975. It's known locally as Chester's space rocket. Pace's innovative design was the first detached bell tower to be built for an English cathedral since the Reformation. Said to be the most photographed clock in the world after Big Ben, John Douglas's exuberant Eastgate clock has come to symbolise the spirit of Chester. The open wall ironwork is by Douglas's cousin, James Swindley, and the clock itself by J.B. Joyce of Whitchurch, Shropshire. Below the elegant sandstone Eastgate of 1769 replaced a medieval gateway, which in turn replaced the Roman Eastgate or Porta Principalis Sinistra. So we're just now in Park Street, just off the wall by Newgate, and the 6 serving cottages here are the oldest almshouses in Chester. Residents had to be over 65 years old and promised not to indulge in tobacco or alcohol. In the late 1960s, the almshouses were rescued from collapse and heavily restored by Chester City Council. There is an unusual parish boundary sign marking the boundary between St Olave's and St Michael's parishes. So these are the Roman gardens.
So, what you have to imagine, this sword is on top of my shoulder, okay?
So this is the Roman Amphitheater. But we've been invaded by Romans, I think. So the partially excavated remains, including about 40% of the arena, are the largest Roman amphitheatre in Britain. It lay just outside the south-eastern corner of the fortress and may have seated 10,000 spectators at its height. The first amphitheatre was built around 80 AD. In about 200 AD, The structure was remodelled with a 12-metre high outer wall, a decorative facade and internal staircase. It was used for gladiatorial combat and executions. By the 11th century, much of its masonry had been taken to provide stone for new building projects across the city. So this is St John's Church, built in the Victorian era, and within the Victorian exterior is one of the region's finest Norman churches. It was once Chester's first cathedral. So we're just on the Groves, and this building in front of me is an anthracite cell, and it was probably built in the mid-14th century to house an anchorite or hermit, a recluse who locked himself away for a life of prayer and contemplation. The building was much altered in Victorian times when a porch from St Martin's Church was added. This massive stone weir across the River Dee was built in the 11th century to provide water power for the Dee corn mills, situated on the city side of the old Dee Bridge. By the 17th century, the weir served 11 water wheels, 6 for grinding corn, 3 for fueling cloth, and 2 for raising water to a water tower on the bridge gate. Bridge gate, it's got a bit of a flood. We're going to go under here and head to the Bear and Billet.
And then I will be back.
So this is the Bear and Billet. Dated 1664, this is one of the last major timber-framed houses to be built in Chester and probably the whole country, until the style was revived in the 19th century. It seems to have replaced an earlier house destroyed in the 1640s when Royalist Chester was attacked by parliamentarians during the Civil War. Until 1867 it was owned by the Earls of Shrewsbury, who as custodians of the bridge gate had the right to control tolls and goods brought through the gate into the city. It became an inn in the 18th century. This is St Mary's Church. The original parish church was in the tiny chapel of St Mary de Castro in the Addleshaw Tower of Chester Castle. By about 1350 this was too small and a new church outside the castle was commissioned. This became the final resting place for many prisoners, including 3 witches sentenced to hang in 1656. Inside is a fine timber roof and the tombs of several important families. So I'm stood in the middle of a car park, but we're actually in the middle of the grounds of Chester Castle. Chester Castle was built between 1788 and 1822 by Thomas Harrison, and largely replacing the medieval castle. These neoclassical buildings have been described as the best examples of the Greek revival style of architecture outside London. So we're just going to exit out this car park to the castle. Now it looks like the castle buildings host like magistrates courts and things like that. So we're going out this fantastic structure here, which is a propylaeum, or Roman gateway. It's really impressive. Let's have a look at it from this side. Pretty amazing. Now I think this big round glass building was built after this Millennium Trail was devised. It's a pretty amazing building. But our next building is this one over here, the Chester Magistrates Court. It was built in 1991 to replace the old Magistrates Court in the Town Hall, and this is an excellent example of how a truly modern building can make a positive contribution to a historic setting. Don't agree with that one. It's ugly. Opposite is the Grosvenor Museum, a fantastic free museum that I used to visit with my nan. The Grosvenor Museum was built in 1885 to house the collections of the Chester Archaeological Society and the Chester Society of Natural Science, Literature and Art, together with schools of science and art. It was designed by the Chester architect Thomas Meakin Lockwood, and the museum is named after Hugh Lucas Grosvenor, the first Duke of Westminster, who donated a portion of the site in Grosvenor Street and part of the building costs. The rest of the costs were met by public appeal, and the museum was reopened in August 2000 following major improvements. So opposite is Gamel House. The external appearance dates from about 1700, when the timber structure was refronted in brick, with a classical doorway and unusual elliptical windows. The entrance at first floor indicates that the building once had an elevated row walkway, similar to those in Chester's main streets. Inside is a medieval grey hall. And in the 17th century the building was owned by the influential royalist Gamel family, who leased the Dee corn mills. King Charles I is said to have stayed here on the eve of its army's defeat at the Battle of Rowton Moor on the 24th of September 1645. So the white building is Park House. In the 18th century, Lower Bridge Street was Chester's most fashionable street, and many leading families built new townhouses here. Rebuilding resulted in the medieval rows being lost on both sides of the street. This elegant Georgian townhouse was built in 1715 by Madam Elizabeth Booth and became one of Chester's leading hotels, called the Albion Hotel, in the early 19th century. The Duke of Wellington stayed here in 1820, and the Albion Hotel closed in 1850, and the park behind was developed for housing, including Albion Street. This is Tudor House. Like many other buildings in Lower Bridge Street, Tudor House once contained a Rowe, but it was enclosed to form an upstairs front room in 1728. The large sash windows probably date from this time. At street level were two shops. One was the Britannia Inn until 1820, and the other a bakehouse. The original oven has been preserved inside. So across this busy road is the Falcon. This is the surviving half of a much larger medieval townhouse, which extended down Lower Bridge Street. Original 13th century timbers survive in the undercroft, now the beer cellar. Formerly the townhouse of the Grosvenor family, in 1643 the Rowe was enclosed by Sir Richard Grosvenor and was the first building in Chester to lose its elevated Rowe walkway. The Falcon was an inn from 1778 to 1878 when it was repaired by John Douglas and reopened as a temperance house. It was restored in the 1980s and became a public house once again. The three arches at Rowe level are some of the earliest structures to be seen in the rows and provide a vital clue to what Chester's medieval stone houses looked like from the street. These three round-headed arches form the Rowe frontage of the 13th century hall, built at right angles to the street. The property was enlarged in the 14th century to form a stone hall of massive proportions running parallel to Bridge Street. The brickwork of the upper stories dates from the 18th century, but much of the original medieval stonework survives inside. So these corner buildings at the Cross are the most famous of Chester's Victorian and black-white revival. They were designed by the local architect T.M. Lockwood and are dated 1888. The Victorian half-timbered buildings tend to be larger and more highly decorated than the 16th century ones. So this is Brown's of Chester. It was built in two very different styles. One classical, the other high Gothic. And these adjacent buildings represent two phases in development of Brown's, Chester's leading store in the 19th century. Established by Susanna Brown, Brown's quickly became the symbol of Chester's importance as a fashionable shopping centre. It has often been described as the Harrods of the North. The severe classical building of stone Doric columns opened in 1828. In 1856, T.M. Penson's extension was designed in the Gothic style to reflect the early 14th century stone vaulted undercroft or cellar which survives below. So this is 33 Eastgate Street, now the National Westminster Bank. This was built as Dixon and Wardle's Chester Bank. By the late 1850s, local opinion firmly believed that new buildings in Chester should reflect the black and white style. Proprietors of the Chester Bank decided to commission a monumental classical stone building in the middle of Eastgate Street. The design was inevitably controversial. 30 years later, when so many adjacent buildings have been given the half-timber treatment, George William's Bank was still hated for being distinctly out of place in such a street. This is St Wilburg Street East. It was originally a narrow alleyway. It was widened in the late 19th century to make a new approach to the cathedral. On the eastern side, John Douglas created an outstanding range of timber buildings. There are carved figures of Norman earls, saints, including St Wilburg herself, and even Queen Victoria, in whose Jubilee year the buildings were completed. This is St Nicholas's Chapel. It was built in the early 14th century as St Nicholas's Chapel. Medieval buttresses and windows can be seen from the side passageway. Between 1545 and 1689, this was the Common Hall, Chester's most important civic building. It was used as the Wool Hall and as a playhouse before being converted into the Theatre Royal in 1777. The present Gothic appearance dates from 1855 when it became a music hall. Charles Dickens gave readings from his novels here in 1867. After the music hall closed, it became an early cinema and finally a shop. This is St Wilburg Row. This range of arcaded shops and offices is a rare example of 1930s architecture in Chester. It was built in 1935 by Maxwell Ayrton, who also designed Wembley Stadium. So Chester Cathedral was founded as a Benedictine abbey dedicated to St Werburgh in 1092. From 1260 to 1537, the Norman monastic buildings were gradually replaced by the Great Gothic building, which became the cathedral in 1541. Much of the cathedral was restored and embellished by Sir George Gilbert Scott between 1868 and 1876. Well, that's the end of part 1 of my Chester Millennium Trail. I really hope you enjoyed it, and those Christmas trees in the cathedral were absolutely breathtaking. Part 2 will be coming soon. Until then, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.